She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at age 49. And my question for this video is, would gut health have helped? Now, this is not just some story I read online somewhere, but this is very personal to me because the person in mind, the woman in mind, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at age 49 was my own mother. Here is a picture of our family, and I think this is the spring of 1966. I am 2 years old. My sister is 4 years old, and my mother is 36 years old. And if you look at data on Alzheimer's, people begin to acquire the disease, begins to affect their body somewhere between 10 or 15 years before symptoms, before they're actually diagnosed. So it's quite likely, sadly, that even at this young age, my mother had Alzheimer's and it was beginning to develop. And from this point forward, I'm going to be referring to her as our mother because what I want to examine in this video is my sister's gut health results. So she took a gut test and then started on a product from Layer Origin, HMO powder, and then we retested her, and these are the results. And I want to see how it might have impacted how her results would be protective against Alzheimer's, and if such a regimen and a lifestyle could have helped my mother many decades ago now. So here is a picture of us now. And I am 59. My sister is 61. And thankfully, we are in quite good health. We don't have any autoimmune diseases, metabolic diseases, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, none of that. So we are extremely thankful for that and enjoy a very close relationship to boot. And we certainly have talked about our mother's Alzheimer's over the years. How can you not? But we have not obsessed over it. We've not worried. We've not even gotten any genetic testing. We've just tried to live a pretty healthy lifestyle. And thankfully, we are healthy at this stage. We certainly have far surpassed our mother's health in that regard. So I want to take a look at how gut health could have impacted our mother's health, and thankfully, how it may impact our health and countless people as well, if you could follow this basic advice. First of all, just the point I already made there that time period, often called preclinical Alzheimer's disease, likely begins 10 or 15 years before people actually have symptoms. And then there's a very common gene called APOE4, which increases the risk for Alzheimer's disease and also is associated with an earlier age of disease onset. We don't know for sure, but highly likely that our mom had the APOE4 gene, especially because of its association with early onset of Alzheimer's. I think it would be extremely unlikely to have such early onset without also having that gene. So the way this works in the gut is you have something called the microbiome. I use that word, gut-brain axis, abbreviated MGBA, sometimes called the second brain, and sometimes referred to as being quasi-autonomous. What does that mean? It just means that the gut actually has some autonomy over the brain. We think of our organs as the brain constantly telling each organ and cell what to do. And of course, that is true for the most part. But the gut, because of the bacteria and because of the way the bacteria impact the rest of our body, it can be said that it's quasi-autonomous. It's acting, in other words, independent of the brain and actually sending certain chemicals to the brain. So if I can zoom in on this area, pathways, just letting us know multiple pathways between the microbiome gut brain axis, immune system. We've learned a lot about that through COVID-19, neuroendocrine system, enteric nervous system, which is just the nervous system in the whole digestive tract, circulatory system, and vagus nerve. And we'll be looking at a couple of these a little bit further here. And the various impacts that the gut can have upon the brain. Neurodegenerative diseases such as MS and Parkinson's, of course, Alzheimer's, even things like tumors and stroke, and then neurodevelopmental and neuropsychiatric diseases, autism spectrum disorder. There are actually on the biome site, website that I upload my results to for comparison, apparently there are a lot of young children that their results are being uploaded there, their gut health tests, trying to find a link and, of course, help for the children with ASD. Depression, anxiety, stress, even schizophrenia. In the case of our mom, she also had major depression. She was hospitalized a couple of times that I remember. So, quite likely that some of the health things were related to that as well. And we grew up with the SAD diet, the standard American diet. I'd wake up in the morning and have Cocoa Puffs or uh, some other sugar cereal and a gigantic glass of orange juice, and that's what we start off for the day. And then you might have a bologna sandwich on white bread. If you grew up in that area, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Our diet was just horrendous. We knew nothing about nutrition, and so that's what we all ate. And here is a look between your gut cells and the brain. And the red cell in the middle there is a single colonocyte, which is an epithelial cell, which is a one single layer barrier of cells between the interior of your colon and your bloodstream and other things. And you see there what is called a disrupted barrier. That is what we generally call a leaky gut. And you see on the other ends what would be a tight junction, the way that a healthy gut would be. And then the vagus nerve goes from the colonocytes, from the enteric nervous system directly to the brain. It's often the vagus nerve, often called a nerve superhighway. And some other things to note here. So disruption of the tight junctions, in other words, leaky gut. Colonocytes and short chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, help maintain those tight junctions. An LPS toxin from gram-negative bacteria enter into the scene here, and there's two dangers with LPS, lipopolysaccharide. One, that if you do have a leaky gut, it will travel throughout the whole body and cause systemic chronic inflammation, causing almost every disease state that we're aware of right now. So very very much a problem. But the other thing, not only does LPS travel throughout the body and do all of that, but it can actually open and disrupt the tight junction. It has the ability to do that. There are a lot of other things that can cause a leaky gut. It just so happens that LPS can cause a leaky gut and then sneak through those disrupted barriers and travel throughout the body. Vagus nerves, I mentioned, superhighway. 70% of the information moves from the gut to the brain, which again is counterintuitive. We normally think of the brain signaling our organs, but in this case, most of the information travels the other way. Remarkably, 90 to 95% of serotonin is produced by gut bacteria, what's often called the happy molecule. Does not initiate in your brain, rather goes largely from your gut, produced by bacteria to your brain. Then we have this blood-brain barrier, which normally is extremely hard to pass through. And we are designed that way intentionally to protect the brain. But LPS can pass through that blood-brain barrier and enter the brain tissue. Here is a research study that showed that LPS is abundant in the neocortex and hippocampus of Alzheimer's disease affected brains, and that there is a strong adherence of LPS to the nuclear periphery and AD brain cell nuclei. Here's another study that just lists within it multiple other studies that show the same thing, that LPS is detected in various parts of the brain. So it does pass that blood-brain barrier and can you find it in brains of Alzheimer's patients. So, what is the solution to all this? Obviously, Alzheimer's not only took our mother, but an estimated 8 million Americans right now suffer from Alzheimer's, and that number is expected to skyrocket in the coming decades. And it's one of those diseases that just has no cure. You think of diabetes, especially type 2, can be managed well. Many cancers can be fully cured or helped in a significant way, but there is literally no cure for Alzheimer's. You might be able to slow that freight train down a little bit, but we need solutions. Here's one from that same study. With no practical treatment for Alzheimer's disease yet in development, the control of gram-negative bacteria and their LPS may be an excellent strategy to prevent the onset and progression of Alzheimer's disease. So, LPS, that toxin, only comes from the cell walls of gram-negative bacteria. So, what they're saying is here is if you can reduce or control the amount of gram-negative bacteria and the toxins that result, it might help to prevent onset and progression of Alzheimer's disease. And I want to give a shout out, take a moment here, give a shout out to Keith Bell and what he has put together on Facebook, the Gut Club and the Gut Club Stool Discussion Test Group. And I've been a member of that for a little over a year. I've gained so much help and information from that. What he's put together is just a wonderful site to ask your questions and see articles posted. So I highly recommend it if you have any questions, any gut issues you want to address, that go ahead and join that private group. And of course, it's private, so your Facebook friends won't see you asking these sometimes some odd questions that you may not want the world to see, but you can get information there. And Keith is the one who alerted me fairly recently to the fact that in regard to Alzheimer's, it's recently discovered that you normally think of the cause of Alzheimer's as the amyloid plaques that develop in the brain. Well, apparently, almost 4 decades ago, when that theory was first put forth, the data were altered in such a way as to, um, uh, in a way that does not show the true nature of the research. So, in other words, in the last almost 4 decades, as a result, billions of dollars of research money and the vast majority of research in regard to Alzheimer's disease has been almost exclusively focused on these amyloid plaques. And now that whole theory is majorly under question. They may have been wrong or mostly wrong about all of that. So we need solutions for that. So back to the gram-negative bacteria. These are, again, are my sister's results before and after taking Layer Origin's PureHMO prebiotic powder. And by the way, all these charts are from the Biome site website. You can upload your gut health test as long as it has the appropriate FASTQ data that you can upload, and you can compare before and after results. So she started 18% of her gut bacteria were gram negative, which is really really good to begin with. That's about a 95 percentile, if I recall. So she already started with a very good result. But you can see just in about 8 weeks on HMO, her gram-negative bacteria went all the way down to 3.5%. I've tested like 6 people total, including myself, never seen anything this low. And when you see gram-negative bacteria going down, decreasing, you need to think in terms of your LPS. That dangerous toxin is decreasing as the gram-negative bacteria also decrease. And this just makes sense that when your gram-negative bacteria decrease, your gram-positive bacteria will increase. And hers went from 78 to about 89%. That puts her at the 99th percentile. So out of almost 6,000 people in the Biome site website, she is at the very, very top. Another way of looking at the same data, the firmicutes, which is now we're in the phylum level. So you think of a kingdom, which just tells you these are bacteria. The next branch of that tree would be a phylum, and firmicutes is one of those phylums. And she has 97.6% firmicutes, which puts her at the 100th percentile. Now, that's good in the sense that you're eliminating the gram-negative bacteria, but as we'll see, when you have that many firmicutes, also means that you don't have very much Akkermansia, which you want some of that in a healthy gut. You also want bifidobacteria. My sister happens to have zero Akkermansia. She had a good result with the growth of her bifidobacteria. I'll show you in a moment, but she could use a little bit more. So, but that shows the firmicutes. And not surprisingly, higher levels of firmicutes species correlated with reduced inflammation, which makes sense again because there are fewer gram-negative bacteria. So here are her bifidobacterium results. She went from 0.6% to 1.8%. And you see B. longum is the most abundant species in her gut. And that was a 300% increase. And that put her at the 82nd percentile, which is still quite good, but I think we can help her to increase that even a bit more. Now, this was an interesting find that her butyrate was outstanding to not be in any prebiotic fibers, just exercise and a relatively good diet for her was at over 70%. HMO actually took it down to 65%, which is still outstanding, put her at the 96th percentile. And sometimes when you're increasing some good bacteria, others can also decrease, that you can only have so many bacteria in your gut. So we're not concerned about that level, but we'll keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't drop any further. So, how can all this help gut health with Alzheimer's? Need to talk just for a moment about epigenetics, which might be a common word to you. It seems to be. I'm reading about it, hearing about it all the time on podcasts, et cetera, lately. So, epigenetics is epi means upon, something that works upon your genes. So, a common analogy that is used is that our genes are like the keys of a piano, and you're born with those keys. You can't do anything about it. However, epigenetics says that you can work upon those genes. So you can either turn genes on or turn them off through the key foundations of a healthy diet, healthy exercise, and a healthy gut. And just the opposite would be true if you have an unhealthy diet and no exercise. You're sedentary, and your gut is in dysbiosis. If it's unhealthy, then what happens is, for the example of the APOE4 gene, if you happen to have inherited that, which again, you can't control the inheritance of that gene. If you have all of those three core things of exercise, diet, and gut health um, going awry, then you have a much greater chance of turning on that APOE4 gene and then eventually perhaps getting Alzheimer's. But the other opposite would be true, that if your exercise and diet and gut are all healthy, then you may have inherited the APOE4 gene, but what it can do is literally turn off that gene. So you will not get Alzheimer's. Now, there's a lot of other genes that can also lead to Alzheimer's, so they all need to be turned off as well. So, just because you do all the right things doesn't mean you're never going to get sick. You're not going to get any diseases, but your chances are so much better when you have all those foundations in line. And I like to say, I've heard it said that you can't out exercise a bad diet. You also cannot out supplement a bad diet. So the last thing I want to sort of portray here is that if you take something like HMO powder, that all of your problems will go away. Well, it'll help. It certainly will help. But again, all three of those core things are so vital to eliminate and prevent diseases like Alzheimer's. So our mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at age 49. Our dad was a great caregiver, actually cared for her for 14 years. She lived to age 63. After 7 years, sadly, she, as far as we could tell, didn't know anybody. But because of our father's tremendous care, she lived for 14 years. Would all this that I've discussed, would that have helped her? I have absolutely no question in my mind it would have helped her. To what degree, we can never know, but I'm convinced that if things would have been different, if we'd known the things we know now back then, and if our mom would have put them into practice, it's very likely she would not have gotten Alzheimer's. I'm quite sure of that. So I mentioned the standard American diet that we ate, which if you're watching this, these might be some of the things that you consume on a regular basis. And you say, well, some of these aren't so bad. I get a little red meat, nothing wrong with that. A tomato on the burger and a wee bit of spinach in the pasta. Well, if you take away the better parts there, all you're left out with is white flour. And we need to understand these are also prebiotics. A prebiotic is anything that feeds the bacteria in your gut. But the problem is white flour, uh, sugar, and basic starch feed all of the bad bacteria. So these kinds of foods directly cause inflammation. They're extremely inflammatory and need to be avoided. So compare those sorts of prebiotic fibers with HMOs, prebiotic powder from Layer Origin. And just to review my sister's results, her LPS LPS producing gram negative bacteria were only at 3.4%, which is just a stunningly low number. 99 percentile in the gram positive bacteria, which are the good bacteria. Now, I want to make note that not all gram negative bacteria are bad for you. Some of them in smaller amounts can actually be good, but as a general rule, we want to be very careful with them. 96 percentile in butyrate producing bacteria, 82nd percentile in bifidobacteria, which is also a 300% increase. So those are my sister's results. And thank you for, I hope you learned something here. And thanks for watching. I wish you good health.